Hey everybody, I want to chat with you briefly today about what the term God's Son means biblically speaking. And first of all, do you see this? First of all, you can't see the cat here. Ignore that, but I don't know why you don't have one already. We're selling all this merchandise. It's wonderful. I'm so excited about my shirt. I think I look good in it too, don't you think? I think I do too. So anyway, here's a hot day in Philadelphia. Almost the last day of August. We're getting there, aren't we? But yeah, back to the topic. God's Son. It's a big issue. Here's the thing. When we see that term God's Son in the Bible, we need to be careful because Christians tend to jump immediately to, well, that's a sign of Jesus' divinity. But I think that sort of loses some of the force of the term if you look at how it's used biblically. And, you know, a couple of examples are in Psalm 2, where we have this psalm that is about the, for lack of a better word, the coronation of a king. They didn't coronate kings, they anointed them, but that's the same idea. This is when someone becomes a king, and we read God says, today I have begotten you, and you've become my son. Today you have become my son. That's how the phrase goes. And actually it says, I think exactly, you are my son, today I have begotten you. And what that means is when you become king, it's like you're being begotten, you're born of God, and you get this title, Son of God. That is not conferring divinity on the Israelite king. It's simply saying, it's a way to talk about kings back then. It's actually common in the ancient world to connect kings with gods in some way that's different from everybody else. Yeah, I mean, just another example, not to get off the track, but in Isaiah chapter 9, you have that famous passage where this king is called Wonderful Counselor. This child born is going to be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. And we look at that and say, my goodness, well, who else could that be but Jesus, because no other person is God. But in the ancient world, they had what they call coronation names or throne names, that, especially in Egypt, that are like this. And it's just a way that you talked about kings back then. So Son of God really has overtones of royalty and not this person is now divine. Now, in Egyptian culture, you know, pharaohs were sort of deified, and in many other cultures they were deified. But in Israelite culture, they weren't. The kings were never for 1 millisecond deified. Just read 1st and 2nd Kings. They're vilified, if anything. But there's no sense in which kings are divine, but they still retain some of those titles. So, strictly speaking, Son of God is a Messianic title. And by Messianic meaning that's what anointed people bear, that title. And that is a term of royalty. And I was about to say nothing more, but that's true. It is nothing more than that, but it's still a big deal in the ancient world to be called Son of God. Another moment here where the Son of God is used, maybe not the phrase Son of God, but God's Son, is in the Exodus story. And this is where Moses is instructed by God to go to Egypt to release the captives. And Moses is told by God, go there and, tell Pharaoh, Israel is my son, let him go because he's my son. So I mean, you don't have many of these kinds of indications in the Old Testament, but that's a big one where Son of God language is also connected somehow to Israel's existence. Israel is God's son, which means God's prized possession. All of which is to say, when we come to the New Testament and Jesus is called the Son of God, I think we just have to be careful not to read into that, oh my goodness gracious, second person of the Trinity. I mean, no one would have thought that in the first century about any Jew, that this is actually this person is equated with God in some sense. That's something that Christians thought through as the decades and centuries went by, and those things become clearer in later Christian theology. But in the New Testament, calling Jesus Son of God wouldn't have conjured up images all that different than what that term conjured up from the history of Judaism and Israelite thinking. For example, in Luke chapter 1, where Gabriel announces the the coming of Jesus and that Mary would be the mother, Gabriel says, he'll be the Son of the Most High God. And then later on he says he will be called Son of God. And of course we launch into that saying, wow, here it is, we're being told that Jesus is God, is the second person of the Trinity, or however else we want to put it. But in the context of Luke's gospel, it's frankly, folks, it's very, very clear that the language of chapters 1 and 2, and even into chapter 3, where the actual birth story happens of Jesus, they're playing off of these ancient Israelite themes. This son born to you, Mary, is going to be called Son of God, and he's going to rule over, Judah in Jerusalem. He's going to be king. And I think that's the expectation that Mary would have had, or anyone else would have had at the time, that when they heard the term Son of God. You mean the king is the Messiah, the king, the anointed one's going to come from me, and he's going to rule over Jerusalem and set everything right? And wow, that's fantastic. So that's really, really good news. But it's not, again, a description, or an indication rather, that this child born is in some sense God, right? Now you have the whole virginal conception thing. Granted, that changes things a little bit, but the term Son of God would not have made anybody think this is a divine creature. Now the thing about Luke's gospel is that you keep reading and into the book of Acts, of course, and you see this idea of what Son of God means and what Messiah means gets to be transformed a little bit. And I think that's really the point. Luke's gospel begins by talking about Jesus basically in a way that is fully in keeping with expectations of the time. Namely, a son of David, someone descended of David, a man, not more than a man who is going to sit on the throne and rule over the people and pay back the bad guys. You can read Zechariah's song in chapter 1 as well, and bring salvation to the people. In other words, to rescue them from the Romans and give them their independence back. This is the way of thinking about Jesus as Son of God that the Gospel of Luke starts off with and sort of plays within that idea, only to eventually present Jesus as not at all like a Son of God as you would normally think. Jesus redefines Son of God. That's really what I think is going on in Luke. And he redefines it around two ways. One is that this Son of God, this Davidic son, this Messiah, this ruler, this one who's anointed to be king, he loses, he dies. So this is a Son of God whose life ends in humility. Actually, I should say humiliation, the shame of the cross. But then secondly, he is raised from the dead. And that's really interesting. That's the story of Jesus as Son of God. Things happen to him, and he's described in ways that no one would ever describe a Son of God, a king, in the Old Testament. This is a shift. This is a move that makes the readers think, well, this son is different. Something is happening with him, and he doesn't do things that are expected of sons of God, sons of David who are sitting on the throne. He actually is not interested in a throne at all. He doesn't want to, no, a kingdom's not of this earth. I know that's John's gospel, but the same idea. It's not about Jewish independence over the Romans. It's not about squashing the Romans. There's a different kind of kingdom that's afoot here, right? So Jesus redefines the notion of kingship and being a son of God, because the idea of kingdom that he is talking about is a very different one than what people might be expecting at the time. So I think Son of God is a great term if we don't front load it with a lot of stuff that would have made no sense in Jesus's day. And let's sit with that for a while, that, this is a royal designation. And if we sit with that for a while, and if we read the early chapters of Luke as talking about Jesus in that old-fashioned way, what happens then is that as you continue reading Luke, you get surprised. and you get taken off guard, and you might even be getting unsettled a little bit. And when that happens, bravo, I think we're hitting on maybe why Luke would even take us down this road to look at Jesus a little bit differently than we might be used to, at least for first century Jews. Okay, folks, thanks again, and appreciate you being here, and as always, happy to talk, and we'll do it again. See ya.